Okay, guys, hello. Is everyone in place? Cool. Very quickly, just fire and evacuation procedures. There are no fire alarms scheduled for this evening, therefore if the fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the building immediately. The fire exit is located at the rear of this room. Go down the stairs unless otherwise instructed and meet in the War Memorial Park. For members and those people present, please note that the meeting is being webcast live on the internet. Please switch off your phones to silent, or switch off your phones or turn them to silent. And can I ask speakers to, wherever possible, please use your microphones when talking. We'll get going. So this is obviously our first committee back since the election, and we have here on apologies for absence, Councillor Carr was replaced by Councillor Vox, or did I see Councillor Carr? Am I looking at the wrong one? Yeah. There we are. These are the minutes from last time. That's not helpful at all, is it? I'm used to a different set of minutes. There we go. Councillor Blackburn is replaced by Councillor Jenkin. Are there any other apologies or absences for this evening? I have none from Councillor Harper, but I imagine she sends them. Are there any declarations of interest that the committee would like to make? And we'll move swiftly on to appointment of the Vice Chair. Are there any nominations for Vice Chair of the committee for this year? Oh, Councillor Tuck, I'll go to you first.
I'd like to nominate Councillor Michael Blackbury. Please.
We've got a seconder for that nomination, sir. Thank you, Councillor Grassi. Are there any other nominations?
And I'd like to propose Councillor Dillo.
And is that seconded? Councillor Dillo. Okay, we're going to take a show of hands, starting with Councillor Blackbury. 6. Thank you. And for Councillor Dillo. So Councillor Blackbury will be the Vice Chair when he is in attendance at this meeting. So the minutes of the last meeting, are there any, the committee agreed that the minutes of the meeting held on 5th of February 2026 are an accurate record? Agreed? Agreed. Lovely, thank you. And now we have the first item of our agenda is the presentation on the Many Down Country Park. I'd like to note that the parts of Many Down that we're scrutinising have been split. We're not just scrutinising the entire Many Down as a whole development, so important to make sure we focus on the part that is, as much as possible, the part that is being presented this evening. Other parts will be scrutinised as we go through future meetings, and I believe the other part of the development is already on the agenda for later in the year. And this is on Many Down North today. So if you'd like to go ahead. Who? Councillor Cubitt would like to do an introduction for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everybody on the committee. Firstly, I'd just like to say we're delighted to have Urban and Civic here. We have David Ainsworth, who's the Project Director, and Rebecca Smith, who is Head of Communications. And this paper was requested by Councillor Isaac as part of the work schedule. We're super excited about what Urban and Civic have achieved thus far and translating a vision into reality. And I hope you're going to be as excited with the presentation as we are with the developments. On that note, do you want to say anything else, Andrew? No? Over to the Urban and Civic team. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Cubitt, for those kind words and introduction, and to Chair. Particularly, thank you for the turnout, because I understand that we are in competition with a small sporting event happening today, so we won't keep you any longer than is necessary. As has already been said, we're here today to talk about Countryside Park. Myself, David Ainsworth, I know many of you, and to those I've not met, I'm pleased to meet you. Joined this evening with Rebecca Smith, who leads on communities, partnerships on the project and has been with us from the beginning, really. So, as Annalise says, we are very excited to talk about the park and the work, which I'd say the partnership has been coming together to develop, not just UNC. It's a very much a team effort. What's on the screen is actually a CGI of looking back onto Basingstoke from over Wootton St Lawrence, and that's a CGI with an indicative idea of Many Down built in. And the green line is actually a line which goes around the area which is known as the Countryside Park. So that's what we're identifying. And it's quite a nice image to start with because it's quite helpful in setting the scene in the sense that although Manny Down obviously has a large development, a third of it is actually a park. In addition to the development itself, which is half of which is open space and parks and etc. In addition, there's also a countryside park. So 1/3 countryside park, 1/3 open spaces and other green areas, and a third actual development. So it's sort of seeing it in the foreground brings it to sort of life, the size of it. I should say there's only a few slides, so we'll sort of do a sort of general overview and then we can go to Q&A. But to begin with, we want to really look at the fact that how does it sit in its wider context. So if we look at the most macro scale we could probably do here, this sits in something called Big Chalk, which I understand is about 20% of the south of England. And we're part of that big story. There's, I think, best part of 100 different organisations coming together in an enormous restoration project, trying to link these habitats together so that there's biodiversity is joined and less islandisation, bringing back chalk grasslands, the limestone environments. So we sit as part of that, which then sits within Natural England's national character area of the Hampshire Downs, where in particular, if you start zooming in to where we are, and then within that we sit obviously on the edge of one of the largest national landscapes, North Essex Downs. Things I'm sure you all know already, being here in Basingstoke. So what's useful about that though is that Natural England have set many priorities such as biodiverse chalk grasslands, woodland management as all key elements of bringing the Big Chalk story together and bringing this wider area together. And they're things which we've been able to focus the aspirations and the targets of the park towards. Coming then perhaps a little bit more local, coming at the other end of the telescope from a Basingstoke perspective, the area on the right of the image where you can see that the large green space is already existing in Basingstoke, much of it, certainly the larger areas, have always been at the perimeter on the east and the north with, I think, Crabtree Plantation and Basingstoke Common, about 100 hectares, the Basing Wood, about 140, the park at Manny Down, the countryside park, of an equal size, about 101 hectares. It actually helps even out access to green space for people living in Basingstoke. So that's quite a helpful thing. Perhaps enough in context. But actually, the final bit I would just say is you can see there's some travel distances there, and it is within a kilometre. Is highly accessible. Everyone at Manny Down and people living in Winklebury and Basingstoke will have easy access to it. So it should serve quite a large population. Turning to really what's there today, just before we get on to what we'd like to do with it. As I said, it's 250 acres. And the joy of this park compared to some of the schemes which my business Even C has worked on, where we might be inheriting a quarry or some really quite unnatural spaces which we're going to have to do a lot of work and a lot of time to repurpose and develop, and the park will come, but it's 50 years before it becomes something which you're really going to see as a park. Here, we've got strong bones. We've got a fantastic foundation. We've got ancient woodland over about 30 to 40%, well 40% woodland and about 30% is ancient. There's a bit of plantation. And those are really rare habitats. Yes, it needs some management. Some of it is perhaps not had the level as you might have hoped, but it's still very strong. And then we also have a large area of arable fields. Again, quite intensively farmed to date, but actually connected, well, again, hedgerows, slightly disconnected, but things we can fix easily is the point. So without huge moves, you can develop a really, really special rural experience, a walk in the countryside. So we're quite excited on the basis we already have kind of a park. We just need to do some early moves to bring it together. Which really brings us then to, these are some words from a document we produced right at the beginning, which was approved probably back in 21 as part of the site-wide framework. So this was from the Country Park Development Brief, where we set ourselves some aspirations about what we wanted to do and what was important to us. And there were actually a few more, but I just picked these ones. There are certain key areas. There's a hub. Now, a hub can mean many things, but there's an area of 15 acres of land, which is already developed within in terms of the farmstead and there's areas. And we see that as actually providing a community heart for the development, but also for the park, and sort of a fulcrum between the two. And it's an area where we can sort of work to sort of bring the human elements of enjoying that space, and make the aspiration that if we're going to balance amenity and nature, then actually leaning that hub area towards the sort of human elements of enjoying the park is helpful, because it's already over a crest in terms of topography. It's not visible to the AONB or National Landscape now, so it actually lends itself very nicely to that role. So we're all excited about the hub. We'll talk about that later on. The other piece is about how are people going to engage and behave in the park, and the aspiration here is to work on education and community, which again is more to my colleague on my right, and it's about making sure people sort of respect and understand the setting they're living in, because much of being able to balance the population next to these ancient woodlands and open areas is making sure that people kind of respect and understand what's on their doorstep. So there's a huge element of piece of work and aspirations to develop that over the next 15 years.
And I think we've done things like going out and doing volunteering days with your rangers. We have recently asked, we're sponsoring the bee exhibition at the Willis Museum. Oh, sorry, I'm loud. We're currently sponsoring the bee exhibition at the Willis Museum, really keen to get young people in Basingstoke to better understand the nature and heritage on their doorstep and to learn to respect that, going to visit local schools, spending time with Natural Basingstoke and other volunteer groups, because they understand this landscape and the challenges of finding volunteers, retaining those volunteers and training those volunteers, because we're going to need to encourage the local community to take that countryside park as its own and kind of help to nurture it and respect it. So that's the nice part of my job, I think.
Unity's got fantastic examples that the officers and some of the administration have visited, where hubs and engagement with the community is very much in evidence, allotments and all of these things. So it's not just something that's up here, it's stuff that's tangible, that's been really very well done by them in other places in the country.
Thank you. And then moving to access movement, I mean, there is already public rights of way, but access to it to date has been limited on the basis it was working arable fields. So people could walk through on the public elements, but actually in time, we'll open that up to with more accessibility, with more routes, depending on people's relative ability to move, etc. And then when it comes to land use, I mean, the main thrust here, the aspiration is about a regenerative landscape, about recognising that the biodiversity is already quite strong and we have an opportunity to go further, and that's really about how we manage the woodland, how we manage the fields, etc. And then the sort of real crux at the bottom is, and we obviously are very excited on the fact that this is land which to date was productive in the sense of accrued a rent. So actually we need to design it in a way where it is self-sustaining still. I mean, I don't need to make a profit from it. I'm not sure I'm going to achieve that. But actually, we can make sure that we develop in a way which is self-sustaining financially in the future. And that's just takes a bit of time and care to think about the land uses and how we go about it, which we can talk about later on. So this is probably not the most accessible plan, but this is from a framework, which I decided to take the key off because it was impenetrable. But what it says is really we've been through the elements, and there are 3 zones to this park. There is, if I start with the hub, the area is shaded in grey or brown. I mean, it's 14 to 15 acres of land. It's a piece which we'll talk about in a moment. It's an element which, as I say, very much for people to enjoy, etc. And then you move a bit further into it, and there's open fields, a sort of second major use. And although there's a lot more to it, the general theme is talking back to those natural England targets, etc., working to move those fields back into natural landscapes, chalk grasslands, which it historically would have been, is the main core of what we'll be doing. There'll be other bits, it's not just chalk grasslands with elements, but that is the core piece. And that will actually go to the biodiversity. And then the woodland itself, The third block, the third major land use, well, that is there, mostly ancient. The main key piece of work we need to do there is around management, and we've started that process in ensuring it's safe along the access routes, the prowls currently. So most of our focus to date has been on making areas we know people go safe, and in due course we need to work further and wider through the woodland. But that will take some time, but the process has begun. And the same with the farmland. The no low input crops have been used for the last 2 years with a view to keeping to impoverish, with a view that the species which chalk grasslands and the varieties which would be in there prefer fields which haven't had nitrates and the rest of it being pumped into it year after year. So we're working for a process of changing the character of the soil types. And as another example of those elements will be, in due course, bringing more planting to join up the hedgerows, to take, when you don't have large farm machinery, you can bring all these joins back together. And then the bit we actually are really quite excited about, one of the existing elements of biodiversity across the site is rare arable flora. So these really are farm weeds, which would have historically been everywhere. If you go back 100 years in the form of farming, they grew on every verge and every margin. Modern methods have meant that they've actually become incredibly rare, and we actually have a number of them. So I think Kew has, in their seed bank, all that's been collected by Dr. Phil over the last 5 years, and part of it will be bringing that back to the site. Starting with small areas, propagate, end up trying to build a larger area until such time as maybe we can have several hectares of land with these very rare arable flora. So I know that from our perspective, that's one of the, it would be nationally important, and some of these, yes, they are ultimately weeds, but sort of rare arable floras, if we can bring those back and actually, again, look at ways in which we can use them elsewhere on the scheme and elsewhere in other schemes, we can have some fun with that. So it's an area which we're quite excited about. Yes, maybe I should get out more. And then really just the hub. So as I said earlier on, we talk about here, the hub's something which in my mind, the development puts its arms around a little more. So yes, it's a place for people to visit the park, to access the park and go on and see elsewhere. But it's also somewhere which we'd like to take the community buildings to. We'd like to put the nurseries. It's where the school sits on the edge of it, where park and stride in the morning. You would park in the parking in the hub and walk through the hub down to the school. So we're really trying to make it work for all the different elements of the day and all the different uses in the community. It's where we'd like to put some community growing, we'd like to put the allotments, we'd like to really activate this piece. So people are in the park, but in a piece which is very, maybe you should say, human orientated. And then when they leave that element and go further into the more open areas, well then the nature of their journeys then changes. And just to finish on management and stewardship, because I know it's a perennial question. What we have, what we know now is that for the foreseeable, the partnership is the custodian of this park, as it is with the other 550 acres of Manydown. It's a singular piece in our minds. While we're in the delivery, change, the creation, routes, putting chalk mounds, putting ecology features in, while we're doing all that, we absolutely are in control of this and wish to retain that control. As we develop it, and some of our plans will evolve and things we hadn't really imagined, serendipity will come along and new ideas will appear and we'll put those in. And I think there'll come a point where we'll be sufficiently progressed to take a view of where the long-term management comes. And bearing in mind this is a 15-year development. And at that point, it might be that certain parts go to certain places, as I explained. The hub feels very much part of the development, which might sit in that sort of hierarchy of state management. The woodland might belong to a different partner, or the woodland and the open spaces of the fields might sit elsewhere. But those are decisions which we can make at that time. The key bit is it's incumbent through the planning which has been approved to date for the partnership to demonstrate that whoever it goes to, it is viable, robust. And as you might imagine, it is in our interest as a partnership to ensure we develop and create this in a way in which it will be received by the people we are talking to, because there are a number of people in the world who would like to manage these things. So although I can't give you the answers of exactly where it's going to land today, I know that for the foreseeable future, for 10 years, say, that it will be with the partnership. And we are, for very common sense reasons, developing this park in a way with a view that it is able to be managed in the long term by various parties. So that's kind of in the sort of front of our thinking. I've missed anything on the estates. No. As I say, that's all we have on the presentation.
Okay, I'll open it up to the committee for any questions. Does somebody want to go first? Councillor Chapman.
Thanks very much. Is it possible to conceive there being a field education centre established within the hub area and the school? Because Basingstoke and Dean used to have a field education centre, but it closed about 20 years ago, and there's never been a new one established. It's been talked about once or twice, but it's never been established. It would seem an appropriate place to consider that for the longer term future.
I think we definitely consider that. We've talked to a lot of educational groups and volunteer groups about how the hub can work for the community, and I think the education focus would naturally lean itself towards the natural world. So yeah, I can't see a good reason why.
Those are the sorts of serendipity which we hope will come out as we develop. These are the things which, as you start talking to multiple parties, these opportunities arise, and we've got 14 acres, we've got lots of opportunity to work these things in. So yes, I'd be really interested to understand quite what that is and how it might work.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a great question. It's the art of the possible. I mean, obviously Urban and Civic won't be running those things, but communities that want or are interested in space and place and can prove that it makes huge sense is something that absolutely we're all open to. I mean, we've had community groups come and say they'd like to run the community centre because they are professionals at it. So it's all the art of the possible at the moment.
Councillor Carr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm grateful for the presentation. One question of governance and process before we get on to the questions I have on the Countryside Park. I'm not sure this is necessarily like the best way to have responded to the request from Councillor Isaac. It's great to have had you guys come along, and I'm looking forward to quite a useful, convivial conversation about this new community asset. But I don't think it's necessarily very helpful if the materials are not published ahead of time, as we normally would for a council meeting like this. I'm conscious not only of the opportunities for members to scrutinise materials, and we had a few minutes outside in the hall to look at this, we had a few minutes just now, but I'm also conscious of the public at home who can't actually see the materials that are on screen or on the live stream. When we don't present materials ahead of time, there's less opportunity for residents to come and ask questions. So I think there's a question about governance and whether we want to actually repeat this process again. I do think optimally we are publishing written materials beforehand. So I think that's something I think we need to reflect on and consider. I will have a number of questions afterwards, but I think that's worth considering at this initial stage.
So obviously, the external partners, they often come in to share things in this way with us, with presentations. I think obviously this isn't a direct council project in terms of, so it's worth just us accounting for that. I understand what you mean. I'm also all for accessibility for residents to have this information. Hopefully you guys maybe can pick up on how we're making sure residents get this information as well, and then also how we might be able to look more deeply at some of the detail of this rather than just the presentation side of it, which is quite helpful as an overview, but doesn't give us detail on the project.
Just to make the point that the information that's shared in the foyer just outside here was what was shared to residents in both Winklebury and Oakley in recent public consultations back in March. It's all available on our website. The information that we shared today is more pictorial than detail, as you can see, and actually there is more detail on the boards that have already been shared with the public, but I appreciate the process that you guys, that obviously should be followed. So, but that from our point of view, that's where it's been seen previously.
Yeah, I mean, I take on board your point, but I think what we can absolutely do is put it up on the website so everybody can have a look at it. on the Basingstoke and Dean website. And if it can be hooked into this scrutiny committee, that would be fantastic as well, so that people can have a look at it in greater detail.
I did just want to kind of follow up slightly on Councillor Carr's point. We had obviously a hope to look at somewhat at the long-term funding and how it's going to be managed, etc. And I think you vaguely went over some of that, but there was lots of, I think it was art of the possible or serendipity we got a lot of, which doesn't really give us anything to work off or any idea of what the reality of the scheme will look like. I think obviously this is a partnership between us. It's not, this isn't just the council delivering something, so I understand that, you know, there's some give and take here, but I wonder if where your thinking really is on this. When can I expect residents in my ward to need to pay to use the country park? It sounds like there's not really answers on whether they'd have to pay to go and use it or anything like that, or what that would look like long term. I'm not saying that you have to have the answers today, but that's where it feels like it's at a very vague place. And when can we start to have those conversations? When can we expect some of that detail to start coming through? And when can I, you know, reassure residents and hopefully new residents in Many Down what that will look like?
So I think at this juncture, I think David's touched on it. You know, this is very early days. It's open to the public. So, I mean, those kind of questions are like completely not applicable and not an aspiration. This is an open national country park. But I'll let David answer.
Thank you. I was actually going to say something very similar. It's a question which I forget. I live in this project daily, and I forget that some people might be starting with different base of expectation. As Councillor Cubitt just explained, this park actually is a Section 106 obligation to keep it open, so I can't charge people to come and visit the park, as it were. So yes, you can assure your residents that actually, as it opens up, and the only bit I would just mark is beyond the public rights way, to the extent they remain open, because there are elements we'll have to close while we do works. One of the first focuses of the development is actually making sure that we actually join Winklebury to the park with a route which is safe, finished and complete, with a view that people can then transition from Basingstoke to the park without passing through areas of development. So in the interim, before I achieve that, one of my goals is to not limit access, but certainly not enhance it until such time as I can provide a safe route through. So, which is obviously some years away. But certainly from an access perspective, in due course, yes, everyone will be able to enjoy.
Thank you so much, and that's really appreciated. I think that clarity is important for probably the whole committee to have. We're not all going to be at the same place with the project, but that importance of reiterating that message, making sure people know that when you're talking about long-term financial sustainability, that isn't, and on this date we expect this to suddenly need to start making any kind of money. And I know that's what an S106 agreement does, but it's making sure that we have that clarification as often as possible, that reassurance and commitment. Do I have Councillor Tuck? Oh, sorry, did you want to come in? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just really wanted to re-emphasise what David said earlier, that this is something that the partnership will manage over the next sort of 10 years, plus or minus a few maybe, but certainly the longevity of how the partnership manages is really important. And yes, there is consideration around different management, what future management structures would look like, but there's the relevance of those today could be different in 10 years' time. So we fully understand how management companies operate and what could happen, but ultimately, you know, the assurance is that it's in the partnership, it's built within our commercial model in terms of how this goes forward. So I think it's just reassuring you that, you know, this is not going to be sold off to somebody in the next 2 years. This is something that, as far as the partnership is concerned, is crucial to the longevity of the development and for the placemaking of the development.
Thank you, Chair. I've got three things. First of all, thank you for bringing what is quite a high-level presentation. I'd like to know and have some more clarity on the timescales. Like, what are the the gateposts, the stages through, so that when are people going to be able to have access to those spaces, and what kind of outline project plan do you have for that? Second, can we make sure we're using regenerative land management principles? So looking at soil health, minimal disturbance, diversity of cover and water management, as that seems to me one of the more sustainable ways. And a tiny detail point, only because when I went to the North of Wessex Downs National Landscape Conference a couple of years ago, they had a partner who specialised in bees. And because you mentioned bees, and you mentioned it in a community context, I was thinking, oh gosh, everybody goes on about honeybees. And of course, honeybees are a bit of a hazard. We actually want native bees, of which there are many, many different varieties. And actually, it's making sure that in the detail, we are not focusing on populist stuff. We're actually really looking at what nature needs. And of course, that's really probably rather too detailed for tonight, but I'm sure I just want to post that in so that when you're considering these larger things, you are looking at that detail.
Absolutely. Taking that in reverse, I mean, Rebecca, you're probably best to talk about bees. I discovered at the weekend, of the 270 species of bees which are native to England, only one of them is a honeybee, and 90% of them are solitary. And the joy of taking the kids to the park. But I know you've been doing a lot of work on the history of bees and Manidown. Would you answer?
So the initial link really came from Charles Butler and Wootton St Lawrence and the heritage of the area, and actually it was coming up to the 400th anniversary, and we supported the local bee fair, and that has then led into this very kind of lovely exhibition at the Willis Museum, encouraging young local people to enjoy that great local resource and actually learn a little bit more about the importance of beekeeping to the area. So at the moment there are no plans to have bees on site necessarily. It's bringing that heritage to life within the countryside park, perhaps as a narrative rather than as a physical presence.
So they probably don't even know about the rector, Charles Butler.
You're invited to do a history session on Charles Butler.
So he was very instrumental.
He's known as the father of British beekeeping. He wrote a book called The Feminine Monarchy, so he discovered that it was in fact the Queen that was the boss of the hive. And actually, if you wander over to the Willis, it tells the story kind of from before that time and beyond it. And so yeah, it's been a very well received exhibition on your doorstep.
A celebration of something famous in Basingstoke.
Another thing.
Another thing.
Sorry, I'm picking up the other question. So, very quickly on the middle question, absolutely, it's sort of this is a landscape restoration project. This is a regenerative landscape which we like to achieve. So that is all baked into the approach which is being taken. And then coming to the very first, and you'll have to excuse me again if I'm imprecise with the dates, but there's an element of, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, the park is there. So people have access to it currently, but through the public right-of-way network to the extent it remains open, because there are already parts we have to close while we are doing certain pieces. And then time-wise, we are on now. We've begun. We hope to be commencing further works opposite Winkleby now. With you, let's just say, in 28 at some point, we have people living at Manidown and finished areas, and one of our priorities will be making sure there is a green route up to the hub, and from that point onwards, we can really, I think, dial up access to the countryside park, and we've got the time in between to start expanding that network of routes. Again, being mindful about where we direct people, how they enjoy it, recognising where we can then move them away from areas of woodland we're still trying to manage, or Ashton Back and all these other elements, and also where works are happening. We don't really want people and machinery coming together. So really from 28 onwards, we really will begin to open up, and we're beginning to open at the perimeter.
And add to that, I mean, that is one of the kind of like the big kind of serious expertise that Urban and Civic offer, is this whole ability to build in blocks, and for those people that move into the blocks who have access and not to be in the middle of an horrific building site. So it's all done very cleverly and very carefully, and that's why they're master developers, and that's why we have the benefit of them in situ and it not being kind of a mishmash and mayhem. It's all very calculated, clever, and it all is part and parcel of how it will be as an experience as a resident to be living in it when the first houses come on stream.
Councillor Grassi, I'll come to you.
Thank you. We touched on this earlier about the hub area. For I think it'd be a marvellous area for Cubs, Scouts, RAF cadets, because there'll be a lot of outside area. I think it's really important that we have these areas where people can run around, or young people can run around, and enjoy the open spaces. So that to me is a very important thing, and I'd like to see that in place, and for that to grow with the development. So I just wondered if that is in your plan to provide those really important things.
I think all I'd say to that is we have a shared vision and we're in train trying to make that happen. So those conversations have begun.
So it absolutely resonates. We've had high-level meetings with Martin Rudd from the Hampshire Scouts, amongst others, and you're absolutely bang on the money. This is such an amazing area. It's going to be such an important lung for our young and for our elderly alike, and we're talking to all the right groups already.
Just whilst we're on this topic, and with a view that the committee obviously predominantly is there to scrutinise what our council is doing and our cabinet is doing, I wondered, Councillor Cubitt, if you could maybe just tell us some of how the discussions are going in terms of what these community provisions are going to be like, and maybe what conversations you've had with Urban and Civic about progress on where we'd get to with some of these things, and what we can expect to see around this community hub.
So it hasn't got as fine-tuned as that. We've had talks on a macro level with various communities, and as David's alluded to, Rebecca's reached out, but I'm not at that stage where we absolutely have the final data in terms of the building blocks.
And just have those kind of more just the nature of the conversations, have you felt like the council's been informed all through these stages and you're getting the information you need, and the information so that communication between the two partners is strong?
No, I can't fault it. They've been fantastic. And when we've had people contact us, community groups, we've gone and visited them and had meetings, and they're all being kind of filtered in and pumped into the system.
Councillor Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to explore further the point you were raising around management and finance and control, because I think the word that comes to mind, having seen the presentation, listening to the conversation so far, I think the word that comes to mind is sort of cursory. I think actually what we're getting thus far is a lot of unanswered questions about the future. So we have a countryside park that's being delivered, and clarity over management for the first 10 years, and then a number of references to potentially different parts of the site being managed by different partners, unclear about who, unclear about how. I think I have a few questions about whether it's envisaged that the ownership of the land would change at any point, whether there will be a continued owner of the land throughout, separate to who manages different parts of the site. I think the second question is, as you say, Mr. Chairman, very much linked to money. Is there a commitment that there will not be a management company brought in for the Many Down Countryside Park? Is that a commitment that people are willing to make at this stage? What kind of thoughts are there on that? Because that has a really, really important implication. Because, of course, if a management company is pursued, what we would end up doing is asking potentially the residents of Manydown to pay for something that the whole of the borough could potentially use. So I think there is something more to be explored there. And then I think connected to that, what kind of limitations are there on the management decisions taken in about 10 years' time? Because, of course, this local authority will not exist in 10 years' time. Will be a North Hampshire council. So is there anything in the contractual relationships that are being put together that binds the hands of that new local authority? I think those are the decisions I think we need to reflect on.
Again, if I may continue with the reverse order. So if you think about the contractual elements, I mean, okay, so by the time 10 years' time, you're right, we'll have a new authority in place, post vesting day. But nonetheless, actually what we have is a joint venture with an agreement. And there's a members agreement, which actually operates how we, as two parties, between Urban and Civic and between the new authority, operate. There is a shared business plan, which is agreed on forming the joint venture, which sets essentially the plan and how we'll go forward in delivering the place. And obviously it covers quite a number of things. On this, the event, it is recognised that corporate unity has a phraseology around flexibility is better than prophecy, which we've developed from all our schemes. So these super strategic schemes are such that not trying to predict today something which will happen in 10, 15, 20, 30 years on some of our developments is a sensible thing to do. What we try to do is set the governance and the structure that the solutions can form over time and be appropriate for when you have the information when it comes. So again, with this joint venture and this structure, it is a decision which the parties need to make together. That's then layered through planning as well, in the sense that the Country Park Development Brief makes quite clear that is a responsibility of this partnership until such time as it assures the LPA of how this will be managed in the future. So there's an element of it's incumbent on the partnership to develop the asset in a way which is not burdensome or onerous, because actually it will be mine until such time as I develop in a way which someone will take it forward. So that's just, I don't want to name somebody, but a trust, for example, who manages open spaces, if they're going to take it from us, it is in our interest to develop in such a way as is receivable, with as limited endowment as it might need. And we're alive, coming back through your questions, to the tensions around management companies. There will be an estate charge for the open spaces through the development, but it is very much our aspiration to ensure that the estate charge in relation to the open spaces, neighbourhood parks, the several hundred acres of green spaces which the people living at Manydown enjoy, is paid for. But if we can separate the park, recognising your point, Councillor Carr, around a wider audience of users, that is the aspiration. And that's kind of incumbent on designing those places in a way which is self-sustaining, so that really the partnership can fill any gap that might emerge. So that's, and sorry, it's cursory in your language, but at this point in time, it's the guardrails we've put in place.
So, if I could just add, I mean, as an administration, we are very keen for as much of this to remain in public control as is desirable for all our residents. You guys are the guys that wrote the original agreement, so you probably you're more aware of what your drivers were when you wrote the agreement. So I don't know, were you not wanting it to be in public control? I don't know. Is a cabinet
Did you want to come back there, Councillor Carr?
Just briefly, thank you very much for your response. That's very helpful. It certainly sounds like there's a lot of sort of work to do for sort of scrutiny of the sort of various decision points along the way, you know, conversations that can be had ahead of that 10-year decision point. There's certainly my very strong view is it would be optimal if the whole of the countryside park can remain in public hands, or perhaps some kind of non-profit trust. And that's certainly where my own personal view would be. It would be I think very, very important for us to try and avoid any kind of onerous charge for the maintenance of such a large site on any kind of defined group. I think that's something we need to avoid. It's, I think, important not to try and bring too much party politics into this conversation, certainly when Many Down, I think, was an idea generated in, 1994, before I was born. So I think let's try and keep the conversation sensible, please.
Before we move on, are there any other questions at this stage? Anything that anybody needs answered? Lovely. And do we have any recommendations or comments to make? Obviously, bearing in mind that any recommendations would ideally be directed at the Cabinet and our Council rather than to the outside body who are, thankfully, coming in to come and share with us. But obviously, you can make polite recommendations to them, and I'm sure they will note them and take them away and be willing to chat to you about it otherwise. But in terms of formal recommendations, we're making those to the Cabinet. Does anybody have any to make at this stage? Lovely. We're happy to note the presentation and move on. Lovely. Thank you so much, guys. Really appreciate your time. And now we're going to move on to the climate emergency update, which will be introduced by Councillor Tomlin, who I will switch to in just a moment. And this is, I believe, one of two updates we'll get on this year. So start with some questions, but do note that there will be more detail, I believe, coming down in the second half of the year. Councillor Tomlin, did you want to introduce?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will. Good evening, members and Chair. While they're just preparing the presentation of all the details, very much as in the pack that you've got in your agenda. So, yeah, this is us explaining why we and why we're proud, why we are satisfied really that we've been able to get some information together with all the figures that have come in that actually suggests that we're at 95% of our journey to zero carbon in just the 6 years. Now, that 95% is based on the way the government does all the calculations, etc. And of course, I suppose the elephant in the room for us is the time it's taken, the deliberation to get a new aquadrome working, which has obviously been going on for a while, but we focused, it's now in place, we have a tender, we have a supplier, and that's the thing that's responsible for about 60% of the remaining carbon that it generates from the way it heats the water, the pools. It's incredibly energy greedy, if you like, and we're going to put in something far better in the future. But right now, that means we are slightly short. I think 95 is still, from a very ambitious target that we set, a pretty good way of looking at it. We did also use at this stage the carbon credits that were bought some years ago. We put that in. Now, I don't like using those. It is going to produce some more forest trees in Scotland, but we didn't want to go and buy any more. So by looking at all of this, there are ways that we have carried on building reduction in carbon. We're not just sat back and said, right, the figures, let's wait for it. We've moved on. We've got our green team. We can't actually count their contribution. We think it's over 400 tonnes. It's quite a significant thing with the work that they're doing and encouraging people to save energy. But also, we've not held back in council owned properties. We've done the solar panels on the community centres. So when you start to add all that up, you could argue we're more than achieved it, but we've been actually offsetting it in some way by spending money in this borough, which is important. So as we go forward, we've got massive challenges, but I think we've set a goal. We've certainly changed the culture in this council, but if we can change the culture in the borough to actually start to really bring the borough down for our targets in our strategy, then this is the start, but this is that we mean business and we've achieved a lot. So I'll hand over now to Sam, I think, who's going to run us through the detail so you can all look at it and scrutinise it for us. And then obviously afterwards we'll take questions and see what we make of it.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Sam, can you introduce yourselves just so everyone knows who you are before you get going?
Yeah, good evening all. I'm Sam Taylor, the Climate Change Manager here at Council. This is Mark Lambert, Head of Climate Change Facility. So, cool. I'll run through the slides just to brief on that. So hopefully you had a chance to look through. Conscious they were in the pack, so hopefully you had a chance to look. We'll briefly recap kind of last year. We came a couple of times, obviously, on the strategy being updated, so we'll touch on that. Look at the operational emissions of the council, as Councillor Tomlin has introduced. Those other carbon savings. And then actually what it might be familiar with those who've been on the committee before, we tend to, for this update, run through the kind of progress since our last update, what we're kind of currently working on or propose to work on in future, and next steps. So yeah, just by way of quick recap for all of us who cast our mind back to last year, and we didn't bring an update in quite the same way last year on what we were doing, mostly because we were obviously going through the update to the strategy. A number of you were involved in the task and finish group that we had, which looked at particularly our borough-wide emissions and the work that the Carbon Trust were doing. We commissioned them as experts to support us in kind of a route map to a net zero borough in particular. Then obviously through the summer we looked at a kind of consultation on the draft strategy, combined all that to update that, which was adopted at the end of last year. That strategy, as you said, was an update, an upgrade on the old strategy, just refreshing what we were looking at. The focus, I guess, has looked to move towards how we address borough-wide emissions, given what we're about to talk around kind of the council operational emissions, but within there the 2025 target did remain. So just then to address, where did we get to? So usually we report council emissions on a financial year, and actually at Resources Committee in a couple of weeks, the 25-26 emissions are included as one of our key performance indicators of the council, and they have gone down as well as a sneak peek. But what the 2025 calendar year looked like was this almost 95% reduction, as Councillor Tomlin introduced. So these are slightly rounded figures just for simplicity. You can see where we started at about 3,700 tonnes in that 2018-2019 year, and got to 195 by the end of December. These emissions are what's called our net market-based emissions. So these emissions reflect the fact that as a council we buy renewable electricity, which is great. That's a decision we made very early on after the climate emergency declaration, ensuring that we're buying clean energy, clean renewable electricity. It factors in the green spaces that we own and manage as a council and the carbon that is absorbed by those, carbon sequestration it's called, and then also for this one-off year, as Councillor Tomlin has recognised, the impact of the credits, which is 1,331 of those. So a credit represents a tonne of carbon. As we talked about, just for info, we put the fact that the aquadrome, the leisure facilities generally are the most significant contributor, with the aquadrome being the largest one. And it was just to recognise that obviously we are replacing it, and that's great. It's meant that we haven't really invested in decarbonising the existing asset, just because we don't want to, throw money sensibly at something that's not going to exist. So then, the new facility is going to go a long way to supporting our targets there. Just to visualise that last point in particular, this is a quick breakdown of where our emissions come from. Probably easier to see in your pack than maybe on the slide from where you're all sitting. That big blue chunk is the aquadrome, so it's over 60%. The orange chunk is Tadley, so 3/4 of our emissions as a council in 2025 came from our leisure facilities, and that's our gas consumption in particular. They use a lot of gas to heat the water in particular, but heat the facilities. It's worth noting things like the dark red on the top, towards the top left, there's our waste fleet. That was one of the most significant contributors to our emissions back at the beginning when we declared the climate emergency. You can see the reduction there. So some of our biggest contributors we have made some huge progress on. Just to visually represent again the journey I guess we've been on. So this shows our emissions, these net emissions that we talked about since the climate emergency declaration, and we started reporting on it. And we set that 18-19 as our baseline year. The significant drop, as you might imagine, in 2021 was as a result of COVID, the huge changes to the way we operated as a council. But as a trend line there, you can see a general year-on-year reduction. We take outside this kind of couple of year gap there as our emissions have come down. We wanted to represent here where our emissions are without the offsetting, so they are still down on last year. You can see that the impact that the offsetting has had there to bring us down to that 195 tonnes. Just then to add on to that, the next slide has a bit more detail that you might have seen. We as a council are, I guess, enabling and facilitating and investing in projects that are resulting in wider savings, directly resulting in savings as a result of our activity. And that's around 800 tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions as a result of those projects from last year. And this graph just shows that, again, if you kind of were to consider those, that's where you'd get to below that line. And the little cross at the bottom there again is, if you take account of the savings when we have the new leisure facility and the aquadrome is no longer in operation, again that's just a kind of visual representation of where those emissions would be. So these are just a kind of narrative then around those wider emission savings. About 500 tonnes are from kind of energy, so that's the green team and our community centre solar PV project. So around 40 tonnes a year is due to those solar panels on community centres, and that's outside obviously of the benefits to those community associations in terms of financial savings as they try and operate these facilities, as energy bills have skyrocketed, as we know, in recent years. And then the green team as well. So there's a bit more detail on those in the next slide. For those who can't remember or aren't familiar, hopefully you all are, but they are kind of our boots on the ground, really, in terms of resident and community and business engagement. One of their key functions or services is home energy surveys. They'll go to homes and conduct around about an hour survey, give people advice, guidance on how they can save money, both for free, but also maybe signpost them to financial support available, grants, large interventions like energy efficiency, solar panels. The team have been going for a while now, so we're able to collect feedback from residents that we've visited to understand what changes they have made and what interventions they've made, and by using that data we've been able to look at kind of the savings we'd expect from the people that they visited. Another big significant capital rollout over the years has been around electric vehicle chargers that we have installed as a council and been responsible for in a quite significant way. Again, when you look at comparing the energy used to charge those vehicles versus the expected mileage from an average petrol or diesel car, that looked to save over 300 tonnes, and actually has saved over 900 tonnes since 2021. So we're kind of seeing that increased growth, as you would expect, with a kind of increasing number of electric vehicles on the road. Just then moving on to kind of progress, probably since we last visited committee. I've just talked about the green team, so they continue to offer their home energy, garden and business reviews for small and medium enterprises. This year just gone has seen them complete their 1,000th energy survey, bit of a milestone, and they completed over 500 surveys in total over the last year. Hopefully some of you might have seen they were included in regional press coverage on BBC, including a little article on Saturday, a little segment, in fact, talking in particular around how they're supporting nature. I would obviously say that we're focusing on the climate emergency in this briefing, but the team overlap a huge deal, as you imagine, with the ecological emergency and the team tackling that, so we're able to support that. They continue to have a really high satisfaction rate. And I guess particularly notable probably for most people is that their interventions are expected to save over £100,000 for residents a year. And again, that's growing the more and more we see. So we care about the carbon, but I think residents care about the money in their pocket in particular. So that's a really important thing for us to recognise. And yeah, they kind of continue to support residents through government funding where applicable and support them through what grants are available. Other external engagement is really important, and I think, as I touched on before, as we move towards addressing borough-wide emissions, this is more and more vital in terms of what we're trying to do. Off the back of the updated strategy and the work we did with the Carbon Trust, engaging key stakeholders, we launched what we've called the Basingstoke and Dean Net Zero Steering Committee. Bit of a mouthful, but it's trying to pull together a handful of strategic organisations that, you know, we're all aligned in what we're trying to do in terms of cutting carbon, decarbonising the borough, supporting residents, businesses, etc. Thinking, well, how can we do this together? How can we support each other to get, you know, even more bang for our buck in terms of what we're trying to achieve? So at the moment that includes SNG and Vivid as our kind of two key housing association partners, the NHS, the Hospital Trust, the Chamber of Commerce, the distribution network operator, so SSEN, who own the electricity pylons, the electric cables in the ground in particular, and public health from Hampshire County Council. And so yeah, we've had 3 meetings to date. In particular, focus now, I guess, has been on, you know, what small projects can we start to get going. In consideration that we will be a new and bigger authority perhaps in the future, but working out what we can do already. Green Week is running as we speak, and we had a launch event over on Saturday in the malls, and that's just an example of the kind of engagement and events that we're doing and involved in. That one in particular was we played a key part in coordinating community organisations to do that. We run the Basingstoke Area Sustainability Group, brings together parish councils, community groups in particular. And we continue to use the Sustainable Basingstoke identity, which we continue to get new sign-ups, new members as we communicate with residents and organisations to do that. Internally, we are running enhanced training. We call it Climate Fresk workshops for staff with nearly 100 now trained up as a way to understand climate change better, but lead to action and action plan as a team and a council. And we're now integrated as part of our staff induction. So again, we continue to feature really prominently in what the council are doing. On the kind of travel transport side, a new cloud club is due to be introduced imminently. It's kind of subject to final contractual agreements there. Alongside that, we continue to roll out electric vehicle charges, council community centres in particular, where we own the land is easiest to do that, and to support the car club. One of those schemes has been at Wade Road, our operational depot, to facilitate that ongoing electrification of our fleet and reduce emissions there. Continue to think about how we get around and travel as a council. So there's a travel plan, pool bikes. We have the low carbon biofuel, something called HVO, which we've discussed before, but happy to explain more if people need to know more. But that's now included in, across our fleet. I talked about the reduction in our emissions from our waste contract earlier. That's partly because they're now running on, almost entirely running on this low carbon biofuel. Externally, we're supporting things like the Hackney carriage, so those kind of black cab. We've got a grant to support low carbon versions of those, and we've now changed licensing fees to support private hire vehicles to try and electrify as well and do the same. We've talked about the community centre programme already of solar, and the aquadrome we touched on before, but obviously that's kind of in the final throes of contractual agreements for the new operator there. This building went through a kind of significant project last year, I'm sure you'll remember, to look at the heating system, which has moved again to a lower carbon alternative as well, operating now most wings. And there's the kind of team continue to integrate sustainability, I guess, when they are doing upgrade works at properties more generally. Just thinking then kind of where we are now and looking forward in the kind of year ahead. One of the big focuses of the Green Team obviously continues to be growing our numbers. Now we're looking to kind of continue to collect feedback, what people are doing. You know, that now the team are well established. Promote further case studies and those examples of the work we've done, both from a kind of factual basis but also a narrative point of view. I think it's really helpful for all of us to understand the difference they're making from people's perspective. We're investigating what we're calling a health referral scheme, so engaging with GP practices and particularly social prescribers who are potentially coming into contact with people for whom their conditions are exacerbated by living in a cold or damp home, where we can provide them advice, support, help them stay warm for less. It helps the NHS, helps keep people out of hospital and things, but also we can save them money on their energy bills and cut carbon as we go. We're looking also to promote solar panels in residential areas where they can afford and are able to pay. So, rather than grant funding, we're looking at examples of areas where they can fund them themselves and continue to grow these kind of organisations and networks we've already got. There have been a whole number of announcements from central government around supporting energy efficiency and decarbonisations of properties. We are awaiting kind of details of exactly what that looks like. We thought we might have some by now. As is ever the way, these kind of details get kicked back a little bit, but that'll be a key part of how we engage that externally and work more closely with housing associations. There's expected to be a difference in these funding, so rather than it being a pot of money for social housing and a pot of money for private housing, actually there's going to be one pot for what they are calling cross-tenure retrofit in a very government way. And community energy and other kind of players in this space as well. We want to support them and understand what they're doing. As well as a kind of our operational property that we've talked about, the council obviously owns a huge, kind of significant number of investment properties. They're there to generate income for us, where we obviously don't pay energy bills, and so the investment in energy saving initiatives doesn't have that direct impact and benefit to us as a council. We're exploring ways that we can fund those upgrades while still kind of getting a return on our investment and covering those costs. I'm working with property on that. And I talked about kind of Tadley as being a significant contributor. There's something called a hybrid heat pump project there, so again significantly reducing the demand on gas. We've got kind of the electric vehicle charging strategy, which we continue to implement, including increasing charging provision for electric vehicles. And active travel as well is something that obviously we're keen to promote and support. Has a lot of wider benefits around health and well-being as well as the carbon benefit. We're due to launch a project called Ready to Ride in the summer, focusing on a number of areas where we're looking to promote cycling to kind of demographics in areas where that isn't currently very popular. It's the final two bits, so nearly there. I guess we all experienced the heat wave not long ago. We're aware of the terrible storms. Unfortunately, as we know, doom and gloom, those kind of things are going to increase. So climate risk and vulnerability mapping is an area of focus moving forward. Carbon reduction is a key aspect we've been focusing on to date, but actually we need to be prepared to deal with what the climate looks like. There's significant links to things like the green and blue infrastructure strategy that I think is coming to this committee at some point this year, and other kind of projects, particularly in the natural environment area. Energy planning and strategic energy planning, thinking about infrastructure constraints, what that means, working with those key providers. And of course, a small matter of preparing for local government reorganisation and how we can increase working with our colleagues in Hart and Rushmore in particular. So thank you for bearing with me as we run through all that stuff. So as we've done historically, we'll be coming to the committee later in the year with a kind of full report and update. We'll include additional detail and a full written report and a recommendation there around kind of noting this and obviously raising recommendations, suggestions for us now, and any questions.
Any questions? Councillor Dilley. Press my button. Thank you for that presentation. So as Councillor Tomlin said earlier, that the council used a stock of carbon offset credits for 2025 to help obviously to achieve the carbon neutral target. I've got a couple of questions. If you could clarify, obviously 61%, is it down to the aquadrome, the emissions? If you could clarify what the gross emissions are for the council, that would be helpful. And also, are you able to clarify whether additional offset credits will be required for 26, 27, 28 before the new aquadrome comes into active service? In order for, I suppose, for the council to maintain their net zero status, will you have to use further credits? And if you do, what will be the cost for these credits?
Councillor Chapman, did you want to, Councillor Tomlin, did you want to start there? Because I know you prefaced this presentation with comments on that.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so the gross emissions, I'm sure the guys can add the numbers up quickly. In terms of the credits going forward, we, as I said, don't really like credits, but what has actually played into our hands in that sense is they're not available, or ones that are reputable, worthwhile, so we cannot, and we're not going to go that way. So, as we've tried to illustrate, there are lots of incentives we're doing, and we have to do that. So we yes, be open and honest, we risk until that aquadrome comes in, not bouncing along the bottom. But you saw that graph where it showed where we could be below. We're going to be pretty good, and the rate of will change, the gradient will change, but I'm fairly confident that we wouldn't need them, and we can't have them anyway, so kind of deals it that way. We just have to find more and more incentives that we can use and initiatives we can do. It's slightly frustrating, as we said, some of the actions we do currently aren't, I mean, it's the way they're reported. I can sleep at night knowing that we're saving carbon, and that we're actually not necessarily compliant with activities. We can't go below anything more the council can do. You can see we've done a hell of a lot, and yes, that the aquadrome is our challenge, but we will keep going to minimise our, the impact. Thanks.
Chair, can I do? What I was trying to get over is obviously there's those 3 years, isn't there, between the new aquadrome coming online. So what I'm trying to say is, what will the cost be for our residents or our taxpayers in order to keep net zero? Because obviously if we can't use, how are we going to do it?
Well, yeah, that is the trouble. With the plans we've got, we are pushing forward. Some of the little one-liners I think are going to be quite significant. Our investment properties, things like that, where if we can invest and save carbon that way, it is our operations, because they're the buildings we own and invest in. So we're putting a programme together, and the focus is, because you're absolutely right, the numbers are going to, they're not going to go up, but they're not going to settle at zero. We're not going to get that final push, even though we could technically say we've gone below. We'll be very much bouncing along that thing. But I think when they come into fruition, we have an awful lot of properties we could do an awful lot with, but it's an awful lot of work and an awful lot of resource, which is a thing we're looking at. Yeah.
I was just going to say what Councillor Tomlin said in a different way in some ways. They're almost like local offsets, I suppose. They're not formal in that sense, but the investment we're making in EV chargers, in solar panels on roofs, is effectively, instead of spending money on things elsewhere outside of the borough, we're investing locally so that we both benefit the community and we achieve those and enable carbon savings in that sense. So it's a different way of putting it, I suppose, in that sense.
Yes, exactly. It's probably, I didn't use the right words. Yes, it's our own ingrown investment in Basingstoke, offsetting, whichever way you want to use the words, but that's what it means is we're going to continue reducing carbon, but we're not going to give it to Scotland, shall we say.
Councillor Chapman.
Thanks, Chair. I guess it follows on from that question, really. I don't know the numbers, but I guess we're spending a few $100,000 a year on the climate change and credit carbon improvements. If we to consider both mitigating the risk that Councillor Dillo has just talked about and thought about alternative investments, we haven't identified anything that would be directed towards the local nature recovery strategy. Or there are some elements within there, sure, there are some small elements, but there's an opportunity with the local nature recovery strategy to focus some of that investment into that where there's a multiplier effect. So, for example, if there was investment that went into creating habitat banking within the borough, there's immediately carbon sequestration, but there's also income generation from that in the future. And I think there's probably a good dialogue to look at what's focused on only the climate emergency, think about how much investment is going into that, and should some of that investment be directed at nature recovery, because nature recovery will do both. It will recover nature, but it will also carbon sequester and other things as well. It can improve nutrients and things like that. So I think there's quite an opportunity for a big debate about where money and investment is targeted.
If I may, just on that, absolutely right. It's worthy, as you say, of a much bigger debate. Obviously, for me, it's in both sides of the portfolio. There's no doubt we can do that. One of the obstacles we have to overcome is, for instance, we don't own as much land as we all think we do. You know, 80% of the land in the borough is rural, but it's privately owned. So if we could persuade someone to make a wetland by a river, it's not on our land, can we claim the benefits? I mean, if we can, if we are working on ways with biodiversity, BNG credit banks and things like that, and that's a mechanism that we can affect. Now, can we count that against those figures? I don't know. Are we desperate to do that? At the end of the day, by doing it, the planet is better off, but how we come to terms with our actions. So it will not stop us doing that, and that is in our plan. But as I say, there are some obstacles, unless we go on a spending spree somehow and buy lots of land. It's difficult. It's not ours. I mean, it's not even land we rent. So there's a challenge, but it's definitely a great avenue to explore and to encourage where we can.
I don't have loads to add other than I think it's a good general point in that a lot of our, wherever possible, we are looking at schemes that deliver co-benefits, I guess the phrase we often use, more than one benefit. Because I think whether that's, health, well-being, the kind of nature-based solutions, as you talked about, where it's going to bring more than just a carbon benefit, is always what we're looking for. We do work very closely with the biodiversity team in particular, and are having the really initial high-level conversations around kind of green finance, credits, whatever you want to talk about. What are those options? But I think it's a good point to say, like, how can we make more of it, and as you say, address multiple crises at the same time. But it's certainly the intention with what we're trying to do.
Can I just come back on that? I take your point in terms of what's owned by the borough and what's not owned by the borough, but if we think at a high level in terms of carbon, there'll be opportunities in the future that will contribute to reducing carbon in the borough and also reduce carbon for the council. There's the two different opportunities, both of which are targeted. The routes to achieve that through investment in nature have, as I say, got the multiplier effect in that they can be doing both the carbon and nature recovery. And in terms of investment, there's a number of councils. I mean, it's fairly early days with local nature recovery. I mean, they only came to fruition, in December? Yeah. But there's a number of councils that have thrown in investment for use in their own borough for local nature recovery, and it's accelerated investment from water companies, electricity companies, wildlife trusts, to add to that, to create recovery funds. Yeah? And that, as I say, it seems to me that it has the opportunity of being a great multiplier rather than just going out and buying credits, which I understand the reasons why you've done what you've done. So, but thanks anyway.
I just, if I might add, it's just another angle, is an interesting one. So the recycling and the targets you probably heard from the briefing that we have got to increase our recycling rate. So that's a carbon saving. Our food, we've got to get more people to engage with the food element, because that goes and makes green gas and composting. But there's an element there, we can't claim those numbers either. But, you know, there are initiatives that are at last working the right way. I mean, it was mooted, just as a thought, all the cuttings and arisings from all of our grass cuttings, if we could collect those, we could send those to digesters. We could, you know, there could be ways of doing it. But of course, then there's this balance of the cost of moving it, and that's carbon intensive and such like. So there's that. But no, with the land side of things, it is a question of, there are some projects that we are looking at which will, by their very nature, bring benefits like you're expecting, and we'll have to look at the ways we can claim the dual benefit. Yeah, thank you.
I just got a couple of quick questions, then I'm going to Councillor Tuck. You mentioned that obviously there's a real challenge around measuring some of the activity that we do, but one of the ways that I know our residents will measure it is money and how much we spend on doing it. It sounds like we're doing an awful lot. I just wondered if there is anywhere we can find this kind of broken down into what all of this is costing to achieve. And then also, you mentioned £100,000 estimated savings for the people from the Green Team helping out with energy. Where did that number come from? What kind of source? Is this just plucked out from us talking to some members of the Green Team, or what's going on?
I suppose in terms of the overall cost and the amount that we've spent, we'll probably have to come back to you on that, having spoken to our finance colleagues, but more than happy to do so via you, Chair. In terms of the £100,000 cost, sort of savings, I'll ask Sam to answer that one, to put a bit more in touch with the detail.
So, yeah, essentially it's, we look at proportion of people who've given us feedback, the kind of proportion of certain interventions we've made, and looked at particularly the Energy Saving Trust, which is a really well trusted source of average savings. It is an average, it's an extrapolation, it's not an exact figure, but it's a robust, I think, defensible position to say is what we're expecting. So we've looked at, the savings that we've got from the people. We've got direct feedback, and again, a good sample size. I can double check that if that'd be useful, but I think it's around 10% of people as a sample size, and looked at what their financial savings would be, and extrapolated across the number of people that we've supported. We've kind of compared that against other similar organisations and what they do, and that's the kind of tried and tested methodology, if that helps.
Thank you, really appreciate that. Councillor Tuck?
Oh, hi, thank you. I'd like to acknowledge the considerable work of the Cabinet member and officers to get us this far. I mean, there's no doubt it's been hard graft. I noticed we're asked for recommendations and things to look into, so I was really pleased to see the links to blue and green infrastructure strategy when that emerges, but I do think we should be very proactive about that. I'm particularly thinking of things like cooling of buildings. So, for instance, in terms of adaptability to climate change, historic properties take 3 days to warm up and 3 days to cool down because of the thermal mass, but that's not the case with more recently constructed properties. And I think we need to look at the difference on that 33-degree days that we had. Whether you were stood in shade or on a piece of tarmac made an awful lot of difference. And these are practical considerations that I would like to make sure we are proactively pursuing. I'd love to say, let's have an SPD, but of course that's that's not possible now, but there is planning guidance that we could start to introduce. So it's cooling of buildings, it's possibly, I'm not sure if I'm using all the right terminology, but design for living, so the hotter, colder, and the sudden rain. You know, the rain, I changed my gutters, which were a very old set, and I've put in ones that carry 4 times the volume, and they still overflow at times. You know, the sheer downpour on very dry land makes a huge difference. And again, greening of buildings, for instance, Basing View, we've got huge commercial development and possible resi on the top. And I'm thinking, do you know what? We really need to look very carefully at vertical planting and stuff on that. And I know that can be challenging water-wise, but we have to look at how we're using nature to help us cool the environment, but with those stacked benefits that Councillor Chatburn was commenting on. And finally, I want to bring into this as well the LNRS integration into the climate change strategy. You know, we have to consider these things together, and I know it's tempting because teams work in verticals, but actually we need to make sure we're thinking across those functions within the council and making sure that we really pull those separate strands together. So that would be my wish for the direction that we start to look at. So we're thinking climate adaptability in lots of different ways. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, very good points. It just made me then think another thing we're formulating is rainwater harvesting and saving. It's early days, but that's I said an elephant in the room. This is a second one because we're a bit short of water apparently. So we could do with that. Now, you know, you could start to get quite devious here, and I'm sure somewhere along the line, if we harvested our water, we save carbon somewhere because we're not pumping it. We're not pumping it. You know, you can almost do everything. Just if we stop breathing, that's another one. But anyway, that's another. Right. Thank you.
I'd love to see you recommend that to our residents. Do you remember, everybody, that this meeting is being webcast and that clip can be found online? Did we have Councillor... You were first, yeah, Councillor Slimmon. This is entirely my bad. Councillor Carr was first and then Councillor Slimmon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A few quick questions. I think it would be useful to get a sense of the cost of the offsetting scheme that we pursued earlier. I think it was mentioned that it was in Scotland. It would be useful, I think, to understand, you know, what the sort of public cost of that was to the taxpayer. I think I share your hesitations around offsetting and the whether those can always be trusted and whether they're always the right approach. So I think it's welcome that won't be pursued moving forwards, but it would be useful to understand what the cost of that was. And then on a similar vein, there were 2 projects that were mentioned, and I'd be interested in further information about those because they were interesting. The first was a cycle scheme, the cycle training project. It would be useful to understand what exactly is envisaged by that. Are we envisaging the council teaching people how to ride a bike? Are we thinking about subsidising the purchasing of bikes, or are we thinking about interventions around delivering cycle lanes? I think that could mean a number of things. And then the third point, and I'll stop at that stage, is further information, please, about the proposed car club. What is that? Is that envisaged to be something that we're supporting council staff with in terms of shared car schemes? I think it'd be useful to understand what's envisaged by that.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. I'll answer the first question and the third one, and then Sam will pick up the middle one about the cycle scheme. I will need to check the cost of the offsets, but it's something we can cover off in the response to the Chair's question around how we spent our resources over the past few years. But that's something we can cover off, and we can date that as well. In terms of the car club, this is the type of thing you might see in other urban areas like London, Oxford, Reading, where you're able to hire a car for a matter of hours, up to a day or 2. They're generally provided by companies like Enterprise, and they're quite attractive to those that don't own a car but might want to borrow a car to go to the tip, go to IKEA or pop to the seaside. It's that kind of convenience that people are looking for, and they tend to operate well where people don't have access to a car. They live in flats perhaps, and kind of urban areas, or perhaps younger people. They work via an app, so effectively you become a member of the club, and the app, providing you've got a booking with the car, your phone allows you to access the car and to drive it for a predetermined amount of time, and you pay for it through the app. You return it to the place where you picked it up, which will be a Basingstoke car park, allocated space in Churchill Way car park, and there'll be EV charging facilities there to power the car, because the cars will be electronically operated, and there'll be 2 of those. There's still some legal hoops to go through, but this is a proposal we're working on at the moment. We hope to launch it around the autumn time, I think.
And then just on the cycling scheme, so I should have said that is being delivered through some grant funding we received from the Hampshire County Council's public health team. So that is not direct council funding. What we've done for that scheme is commissioned an organisation called the Walk Wheel Cycle Trust. They were previously called Sustrans, if you remember them. They're kind of one of the go-tos around active sustainable travel, and we're working with them to deliver workshops that will be it's kind of training and confidence building, as well as free repaired bikes using kind of the community furniture, the community furniture project, as well to support those who might not be able to get equipment or access to these cycle schemes. It's looking initially at we're kind of trying to target areas that might be more high levels of deprivation in the borough to start off with, and then see how that goes. So it's a 2-year scheme. Starting this summer is the plan, and a few more details. We're going to have final throes of pulling all those dates and things together, and it will be announced very soon.
Sorry, just on that, I just need to point out a bit of history. Whilst I said we don't like carbon credits, we inherited those 2 portfolio holders ago. So back in 2019, I believe the administration decided, when the emergency was declared, that that was one of the options, and purchased them because they were available at the time. So we use them because they're in the bank, and if they're in the bank, we can't get rid of it. Well, you could trade. We're not in a position to want to trade. That's not what we're about. So we've used them, but as I've said earlier, we don't intend to in the future. But so it was a little historical, and that the figures will come your way. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those responses. Just 2 follow-ups, I suppose. So the first on the car club, it sounds like an interesting innovation. I think it would probably be useful to bring further information on that to this committee closer to decision points, because I think the involvement of providers will be something I think we'd be interested in. So, it sounds like an interesting opportunity for us to facilitate a private provider, but it would be useful to understand probably at a future date what that looks like in practice, I think. The second point around the cycle scheme, it would be interesting to understand how much that grant is, because it sounds like we're spending money on workshops around cycling, and that's an interesting use of money potentially. So I'd be interested to know what the amount is that we've received in terms of that grant. I know that's a decision made by the county in terms of delivering the grant, and that's a question for them rather than for you. But I think it'd be useful to understand how much money we're spending on that.
Because they're part of the same things. The car club, just because it's the first time I'm really hearing about it, I'm probably missed a memo on that one. Just if you can let us know when that decision was or will be taken on that, and what consultation's been done, because I've never heard a call out for it, so I'd be interested to know what the public demand for something like that was.
I can just pick up a couple of those points now. It was a point that was in the car club was a concept first flagged in the council plan probably 4 or 5 years ago, and it's taken a while to work through the process of speaking to operators, gauging the level of interest. Initially, when we spoke to commercial operators, they didn't really want to come to Basingstoke, but we recognise that it's a really valuable kind of resource for those that don't have access to a car and can't afford to own one perhaps. We've pursued it over the years, and we now have spoken to a couple of potential operators, and they've highlighted a willingness to come and work in Basingstoke for a pilot period. So it could be for a couple of years we pilot it. If it doesn't work out, they may disappear. But we're keen to offer residents that opportunity. As I say, it was in the council plan previously, but it's taken a while to get to fruition.
Public demand for it.
Other than they've undertaken some research themselves to understand what car ownership levels are like in Basingstoke, and to understand whether there's likely to be a market demand for it. These things operate successfully in many other urban areas, so they sense there is that demand. We've obviously got quite a few flatted schemes in the town centre where people don't necessarily have a parking space or want to have a car full time.
And I'll just jump in, Councillor Guy, yeah, happy to provide some information kind of retrospectively on the grant. I should stress as well, it wasn't a capital grant at all, so in terms of infrastructure and all that kind of stuff out of scope, hence why the kind of fund was directed at, as you say, kind of what we call them cycle hubs, getting people familiar, comfortable, promoting it, bike kits and bike checks and things like that. So happy to give a little bit of a summary of what the project looks like, as well as what grant funding we received, which might well be somewhere online, but yeah, we'll send it as part of the pack as well.
Note, Councillor Slimon.
Thank you, Chair. A little bit of information to help with car clubs. About 15, maybe 20 years ago, working at the Environment Agency, we had a huge event in the Greenwich Park with the then Mayor of London, and there were already running many car clubs in London for most people who don't want to choose to have a car, possibly because of parking, but there are many that successfully run, and people were coming and telling us all about them. So they're not new, so they do work and they are very successful. But just a point of information, you might want to talk to some people living in Greenwich, for example. My question really was following on from what Councillor Tuck said. During the Tusk and Finish group, which we had some interesting discussions, and obviously the whole idea of area energy planning, etc., came in the fore, and I know that you were progressing that, and that's one of the actions. I think it would be useful for us to know where that's going and how far you've managed to get with those, because obviously we're working with other organisations and other councils to produce that, but alongside the fact that we've got the local plan as well, whether or not that is managing to dovetail into what we want to say, because we have spoken about the fact that if we don't know what energy requirements and where things might have to be produced to provide the infrastructure, when we do the local plan, there is a failing there. So it would be useful to have that all tied in together, and perhaps when you get to work on that, some useful information. I know you're working with some groups on the strategy, for example. Obviously, I probably just need to declare an interest in the fact that I am an unpaid director of a local community energy organisation, which I think is, some of my members are involved in that, so I just declare that. And obviously, we're looking at community energy, and the work that the government are supposedly putting forward, which again is in the offing and hasn't yet appeared, about how community energy can be part of the delivery to provide extra solars and other renewables in the area, which obviously will help everybody. And I'm also be interested to know that when we do hear from the government about how they're going to work with us and others in making homes more resilient, warmer homes, and there's a mention in here about putting solars on private properties and making grants, etc. I think that would be useful for us to know exactly how that's going to work and how we're going to sell that. For example, I know that West Berkshire at one point employed an organisation that would offer a discount if at least 10 properties in a road would all have solars. They offered a discount to encourage people to do that. Now, obviously, that's a scheme that was a few years ago. I'm sure there are others out there, but I think it would be useful for us to know where that was. Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's some good questions there. We could probably take some of those away. I think the energy planning one is an ongoing discussion we're having with energy, particularly SSEN, so Scottish and Southern Energy Networks, around what they're doing, and as you say, already can be engaging with local authorities. There is a lot of work going around Hampshire as well. Hampshire have commissioned a study very recently on infrastructure provision. I guess what we can say at the moment is, particularly with our planning policy colleagues developing the local plan, feeding them as much information essentially as we can around future development, what that looks like, obviously based on the kind of last iteration of the local plan, where development was going to be, so they are able to understand where future development is like to be and prepare the network in advance. And that's kind of where we're at with those guys. As you say, community energy, we are looking at the local power plan, which is again another government announcement, and understanding what our role is and how we can work with that. So I think hopefully that addresses your questions. But if there's more, shout please.
Councillor Grassi?
I was quite interested with the bike hubs that you've got, but I think what might be really useful is to teach young people and children how to change a tyre, mend their brakes, put a chain back on, because I see a lot of people, they start off, they buy themselves a bike, and because something like minor in my eyes, because I was taught all those things as a child, they think, well, I won't do that. And I've seen adults do the same because they don't know how to mend a tyre, they don't know how to put a chain on. But all those things are really important. If we teach the young people, then as they grow up, they can teach their children, so it gets passed down. But I think we could use possibly some volunteer groups who can pass on their knowledge. I don't know how much money that you're actually getting to do this, but to keep people using their bikes, they need to learn how to maintain them. And children are the natural place to go to teach. Their parents may not know how to do this as well. It's all skills that we learnt as children.
You're absolutely right. I've had the same probably skill set passed on to me like you have. There are schemes like the repair cafes that can help people to have their bikes fixed, and there are things like men's sheds as well. So we will kind of see what opportunities there are to work with those kind of organisations to pass on those skills. But really valid points. So we'll take those away and see if there's any actions we can take.
Well, just quickly, I'm sure Councillor Jenkins will tell you all about repair cafes if you want to ask you. I mean, I think I think it's a really good point. So certainly the proposal, has already included funding for kind of bike kits that will give some people that essential repair maintenance stuff, and the opportunity to bring kind of hubs. Part of the idea of the hubs is there'll be this workshop training idea, that kind of confidence building, but also for people to be able to bring existing bikes for a little bit of light touch repair. And we're using the community furniture project, likely to be involved at this stage is the proposal. But I think we can see how it goes, and if actually there's other organisations that might also be worthwhile in being involved, then we're happy to consider that, because I think it's, as you say, a great idea. A bike is for life, not for Christmas kind of mentality is a really good one to have. So.
The other why it's so important, there's two things that springs to mind that's why it's so important, is because to take a bike to a cycle shop to get anything mended is so expensive. So if you're able to do it yourself, that is a good thing. But also a lot of the bikes end up in, I don't know, sometimes the metal might be used, but landfill, sorts of things like that. So if we were able to reuse the bikes we got and mend them and stop throwing things away, that must be a good thing. So I would like to see more money go to these hubs to help stop those, stop bikes being put into landfill or whatever.
Councillor Jenkins.
I was just going to say, Sheila, you can bring your bicycles to my repair cafes. We're always accepting money, of course, if you want to help us out a bit with fixing bikes and things. I mean, on that point, if we are going to push the circular economy, it is a good idea to start thinking about that in the climate emergency as well, with offsetting landfill and things like that. So if we can keep things out of the incinerator, obviously that's going to really help us. So let's kind of try and involve circular economy into the green strategy going forward. The only thing I would say that I was not upset but surprised at is that, I mean, I see carbon offsetting as a bit of greenwashing. And I didn't like the way that it was represented on that chart to say that we're all the way down here when actually, that's up in Scotland somewhere. That's not our carbon footprint. That's the kind of vision of carbon that we've put out. And I just didn't like that very much. But yeah, thank you.
Any other questions or comments to be made on the presentation? Councillor Dillon?
So it was just one, I didn't get the gross amount of emissions for the council.
You did not. Sorry, I lost in the other questions. Give me 1 second. It's on my. And I should say that the pie chart represented gross proportion of gross emissions.
So is it about 1,500?
So 1,500 was the total, just under 1,500 was the total from the aquadrome, the use of gas consumption in the aquadrome. So gross emissions in 2025, 2,388 tonnes. So yeah, of which 60% was that aquadrome.
Lovely. We've had some commitments to bring back some more detail on numbers. If we could follow that up, I'd really appreciate that. And we've also had that recommendation from Councillor Grassi on the bike scheme that we can hopefully follow up in a recommendation to the council on that. Is there any other recommendations or notes that want to be fed back formally on any of this? Councillor Tuck, do you want to go?
Oh, yes, sorry. I'll find my page again.
No, it took too long.
Sorry. It was it was the things like the links to the blue and green infrastructure strategy, which you have highlighted that is a to be activity.
Slightly slow, so Ali can get it for.
Sorry, links to blue and green infrastructure strategy, cooling of buildings, design for living. I think that's all about hotter, colder, sudden rain, but there may be some other thing that it should be, and I may have picked the wrong thing. Greening of buildings, especially commercial ones in Basingview. We've got, obviously we've just approved the demolition of the AA building, and that's right next to plant. And I just think that, the Mountbatten building, I just think, there's an opportunity there to do something really, really special. And then again, LNRS integration into the climate change strategy and the development of Basingview as a whole. Please.
Councillor Jenkins?
Just on the back of that, also, it'd probably be good to look at flash flood routes and drainage solutions for wetter autumns and springs.
And Councillor Chapman?
Yeah, just to add to Kate's point there on the LNRS, I think if it can be captured that there should be a forum for discussing the benefits of establishing a local nature reserve fund, and that probably includes looking at what the gross fund is at the moment for the climate recovery. So a commitment to doing that would be worthwhile.
Thank you. I think we've got that all noted, and I'm sure we'll get it in the minutes as well. If anything's been missed, please do shout next time, and we can make sure that it gets followed up on. Thank you so much for your time, guys. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Councillor Tomlin, as well. We now just have a review, I believe, of the work programme, although I'm not sure I've got the work programme in front of me, really. That might be a problem. Is this going to be on here? Okay, there is nothing else. Lovely. Are there any comments on the work programme as it stands at the moment? Councillor Chapman?
The first one is we've got it in the programme about Paul Johnson coming to the next meeting on the tree policy. I don't think we can overview and scrutinise the tree policy without looking at the biodiversity policy as well.
I think we're going to need to take that away as a comment and check in with officers if that's all right. Is there any other comments on the work programme as it stands?
The second one is we talked when there was the informal meeting with Jenny Jackson about what's likely to happen and what opportunities there are for the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to do with the draft local plan. This would imply that we're not going to get the opportunity to scrutinise any of the draft local plan policies that will be going out for Reg 19 consultation or to the planning inspector. Now, it may be, and it won't be for this meeting to discuss it, that actually perhaps Basingstoke and Dean is going to decide, like East Hampshire Council, to ignore the submission date of December, and that changes things dramatically. But it's just with what's set out at the moment, there's no opportunity for scrutinising.
Yeah, so that's a TBC on there only because of we don't know the exact month it's going to happen that will be ready for us to scrutinise it. But that is very much agreed that we will have scrutiny, even if I have to put in extra meetings in order to do that. That is absolutely a must-have scrutiny on that policy area, and the officers are in agreement on that.
So what's up?
Councillor Carr?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your commitment that this committee will look at the local plan. I think that's really critically important. We know that there are, quite likely scenarios now where the administration may choose not to move ahead with the Basingstoke and Dean local plan as it is, given the new NPPF position. That would be a very, very significant decision that this committee will need to look at and be quite agile about, I think. Similarly, if rumours are to be believed, the administration pursues a North Hampshire local plan on a joint basis, that again will be something that we will need to scrutinise most carefully, particularly if there is any suggestion that on the basis of joint working across those three districts as they are now, how do we scrutinise with them or separate to them? There are lots of the scrutiny decisions and overview that fall out of those local plan issues. And then the substantive question I have is just the direction of the Many Downs South paper and what's envisaged for that currently.
I don't exactly know who submitted the work programme request off the top of my head, Councillor Isaac, so you're probably best off talking Councillor Isaac about that one. On your first point, please, it sounds substantial enough in what you're saying to probably submit as a work programme item in order for us to be able to understand what parts of this need scrutinising. I don't know whether it's the right time to do so, but keep an eye out maybe, and let's look at how we can make sure it's on the programme. Obviously, work programme item submissions, please do put them in, because it's the only way we can guarantee they're going to end up on these meetings, and we can continue to have the meetings full. Councillor Chapman again?
We talked a couple of meetings ago about a work programme item to describe and define the difference between Reg 18 consultation and Reg 19. And quite rightly, Councillor Isaac pointed out that's not really a work programme item, but we need a written response on it. I think it's extremely important because as we get closer to Reg 19, I'm still hearing members and cabinet members defining what can happen at Reg 19 that's wrong. And I think we need a very legal definition that's circulated between us before we get to Reg 19.
I believe we received a commitment from Jenny Jackson that would happen. I'm not sure that it has happened yet, so can we follow up on that, please? Any other comments on the work programme? And Councillor Chatburn, you're going to speak in a moment anyway, so I'll add whatever you're going to say to the start of that. Does Councillor Chatburn have any updates as the lead member of the Task and Finish group?
Yes, I do. So since the E&I meeting when it was agreed to set up the group, the members of the group have increased by 3 since then. So Councillor McCormick, Councillor Ganesh and Councillor Tuck have joined the group. The second thing that's happened is we've had a first meeting, we've had a draft scope and terms of reference produced and circulated amongst officers and the Task and Finish group. And we've had the first meeting. That first meeting voted for me to be the chairman and for Kate Tuck to be the vice chairman. And we've set up a programme of monthly meetings going out over the next 4 months, unfortunately starting next Thursday night, which has now been superseded by an emergency council meeting. So that's not going to happen. I think we'll just accept that and move on with the rest. It's worthwhile explaining that the terms of reference and scope of the group needs to be signed off formally by this committee rather than the group signing off its own terms of reference. Because of the long timescales between the E&I meetings, I was hoping that we could agree at this meeting that as soon as the Task and Finish group has agreed that it can be circulated amongst all the members, and unless there's any problem with it that calls it in, we can just sign it off remotely.
Yeah, I think what it was discussed in the informal meeting that wasn't a formal meeting, but here we can formally hopefully agree that I'm up for that if everyone else is okay to agree that we do that by email, and just any opposition to the terms of reference as they come through, just flag them then, but otherwise let's just agree them that way and let the Task and Finish group get on with it. Otherwise, Kevin, it'd be really great to if you could be in touch with officers about when that Task and Finish group would then like to report any findings, whether it's what of the E&I meetings makes sense for you guys to come back and share some of what you're working on with us.
Sure. For transparency's sake, it's worthwhile emphasising in terms of the scope and terms of reference that the lead officer, who's Tom Payne, is not happy with the terms of reference and scope. And so I'll meet with him and Councillor Tomlin to talk through that. But it's the E&I committee that decides that, not the officer.
Lovely. Awesome. Well, it'd be good to get some feedback anyway and to start to see even where you are at the moment. Is there anything else that anybody needs to raise before we end the meeting? Lovely. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your time. And hopefully, for those of you who care about football, I hope you get to see some of it.